The ritual was the only thing that mattered. It was a process of deliberate, calculated peace, an act of precision in a world that had become chaotic. I knelt on the small, sandy shore of the private lake my grandfather had left me. In my hands was a single, perfectly seasoned log of kiln-dried oak, about 2 feet long. I had already, with the methodical care of a surgeon, cut 4 deep grooves into it with a hatchet, forming a cross at the top. This was a Swedish fire log, a self-contained, self-feeding torch designed to burn cleanly, vertically, and with almost no smoke for hours. It was the perfect, efficient, intelligent way to have a fire, a testament to engineering and respect for the environment. I placed it on the flat stones of the fire pit my grandfather had built in 1952, packed the center with a small amount of birch bark, and struck a single match. The flame caught, climbing the internal grooves, and a moment later, a clean, bright pillar of fire rose, a quiet orange torch against the deep indigo of the twilight. I sat back in my chair, the scent of cedar from the woods mixing with the clean, sharp smell of the burning oak. This was my sanctuary. This was the first quiet evening I'd had since I retired. The sound that shattered the peace was not natural. It was the high-pitched electric whine of a golf cart being driven far too fast over the gravel path that led to my property. I didn't even turn my head. My eyes remained on the flames. My entire career, first with the Army Corps of Engineers, and then with the state, had been about managing chaos, about holding a steady line while politicians and developers screamed. My peace was internal. The whining engine cut off, followed by a slammed door and the rapid, furious crunch, crunch, crunch of expensive shoes on my private path. A wave of perfume, something acrid and chemical that smelled like dead flowers and entitlement, washed over me, violating the clean air. "Absolutely not! Put that out! Put that out right now!" The voice was a shriek, a razor blade dragged across a chalkboard. I finally, slowly, turned my head. There she was. Carolyn, a woman in her late 60s, poured into a white linen pantsuit that was entirely too expensive for the woods. Her hair was a helmet of blonde, chemically frozen spray. Her face was a mask of expensive makeup, now cracking under a layer of pure, incandescent rage. She was brandishing a clipboard, holding it like a weapon, her knuckles white. "You are in gross violation," she hissed, her eyes darting from me to the fire as if it were a 10-alarm blaze about to consume the county. Bylaw 9.4, all open flames, recreational or otherwise, are strictly prohibited. Article 7, unauthorized use and defacement of community common property. I am the president of this homeowners association, and I am ordering you to extinguish that immediately. I just looked at her. I gave her nothing. No anger, no fear, no reaction. I simply let the silence stretch, punctuated only by the clean, quiet crackle of my Swedish log. This lack of an immediate, terrified response seemed to break something in her. Her face, already pinched, contorted. "This lake is community property, you arrogant squatter. You are endangering our homes. You are a menace. I am calling the police." Before I go any further and dismantle her entire, fraudulent, corrupt world, I need to know where you're watching from. Comment down from where you're watching and what time it is there right now. She whipped out a pearl-encrusted smartphone, her fingers stabbing at the screen. "Yes, 911. I need officers immediately. I am at the Lakeview Estates common area, and there is a man here, a vagrant, who has started a huge, dangerous fire. He's trespassing, he's threatening me, he's out of control. Send someone now before he burns down the entire neighborhood." She snapped her phone shut, a look of ultimate, smug triumph on her face. She had done it. She had summoned the armed authority of the state to deal with a man sitting quietly by a single, perfectly contained log. It was a grotesque, staggering abuse of power. But for her, it was clearly just a Tuesday. "They're on their way," she said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "You're going to be arrested. You're going to be fined into oblivion. We will see to it that you never come back here." I took a slow sip of coffee from my steel thermos. "This is private property," I said, my voice low, flat. "My grandfather's. And this is a self-contained, smokeless, recreational fire. I'm not in your HOA." "Lies!" she shrieked. "This entire lake is the central amenity of the Lakeview Estates. I am Carolyn, the president. I know what we own. You are a liar and a trespasser, and you are about to find that out the hard way." The wail of sirens cut through the woods about 20 minutes later. A single Lake County Sheriff's cruiser pulled up, its lights painting the trees in ridiculous, flashing strokes of red and blue. A deputy climbed out, a big man with a weary, frustrated look on his face. This was clearly not the first frivolous call he'd taken from this zip code. He looked at Carolyn, who was now in full damsel in distress mode, her hand fluttering at her throat. "Officer, thank God!" she cried. "This man, he, just look!" She pointed at my fire. "It's a raging inferno. He's threatening me. He's a squatter." The deputy looked at her. Then he looked at me, sitting calmly in my chair. Then he looked at my single 24-inch Swedish Fire Log, which was burning as cleanly as a candle. His shoulders slumped. "Ma'am, this is the Inferno?" he asked, his voice drenched in exhaustion. "It's a clear violation," she snapped, her victim act evaporating. "He's trespassing on HOA common ground, and he started an illegal fire." The deputy sighed. He walked over to me. "Sir," he said, and I could tell he was just going through the motions. "I'm afraid I have to ask you to put out the fire. Ma'am says this is HOA common ground." This was the moment. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. I was prepared. I lived prepared. I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out a heavy Ziploc bag. Inside was a crisp, laminated survey-grade printout. It wasn't a fuzzy screenshot from my phone. It was a professional vector-quality map printed from my own workstation. I unfolded it and handed it to the officer. "Respectfully, officer, it is not," I said, my voice as calm as the lake. "My name is Mark. I'm a geographic information systems analyst. For 20 years, my job was to build the maps the state, the Army Corps of Engineers, and, yes, this county, use for their official tax assessments. What you're holding is the official, filed 1968 Master Plat for the Sunset View HOA. As you can see, I pointed to a bright, razor-sharp red line. The HOA's legal boundary, as defined in their own founding documents, ends exactly 50 feet that way." I pointed behind his cruiser to a line of old, half-buried iron pins. This fire pit, this lake, and this entire parcel of land are not, and have never been, part of her HOA. You can ask your dispatcher to pull the county plat map for parcel 122. He will confirm every single thing I just told you. The deputy's entire demeanor changed. He was no longer looking at a vagrant. He was looking at an expert. He looked at the professional, annotated map, with its clear parcel lines and GIS coordinates. He looked at the iron pins in the ground. He looked back at me, and he knew with 100% certainty that I was correct. He turned back to Carolyn, who had been watching this exchange with a look of growing, horrified confusion. "Ma'am," the deputy said, handing the map back to me. "It appears this gentleman is correct. This is not your property. His fire is not on HOA land." Carolyn's face did something I had never seen before. It went from white to red to a deep, blotchy purple. She was sputtering. She knew she had lost. She knew she had been proven wrong in front of an officer of the law, but a tyrant does not accept defeat. A tyrant escalates. "That's a lie! That's a forgery!" she screamed. He's a squatter. I told you. He's a danger. His fire. Look at his illegal fire. He's a public menace. Aren't you going to do your job? He's a liar. Write him the ticket." The deputy was trapped. He was standing on private property. He was being screamed at by a politically connected, wealthy resident. He was facing a man who was, in all likelihood, the most qualified expert on this subject in the entire state. He had no legal standing, but he had a screaming woman in front of him. So he did what all beleaguered public servants do. He took the path of least resistance. He sighed, the sound of a man who hated his job. "Sir," he said, turning back to me, his face apologetic. Look, I can't write a ticket for trespassing. But she's right. There is a county-wide burn ban advisory. That's for open pit fires, I said calmly. This is a self-contained recreational fire, which is explicitly permitted. You can check the county ordinance." "He's arguing with you," Carolyn shrieked. "He's resisting. Arrest him." The deputy finally snapped. "Ma'am, be quiet. I'm handling this." He looked back at me, his eyes pleading. "Sir, please, just work with me here." I understood. He had to give her something. He pulled out his ticket book. I'm going to have to write you a citation for public disturbance. Just pay the fine or contest it. But for tonight, just put out the fire. Please, just to keep the peace." Carolyn's face lit up in a triumphant, grotesque smirk. She had won. She had gotten her ticket. She had marked her territory. I said nothing. I just nodded. I took the $500 citation from the officer's hand. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just wanted to leave. He got in his car and drove away, leaving me alone with my fire and this triumphant, venomous woman. "That's just the beginning," she hissed at me, her victory making her bold. "We know who you are. We know you're not one of us. We will find you. We will line you. And we will have this lake." She turned, got in her golf cart, and sped off into the darkness. I stood there, the citation in my hand. It was a $500 piece of paper for a public disturbance that had only been disturbed by the woman who called it in. She thought she'd won. She thought this paper was her weapon. I looked at the citation, and all I could see was a legal confession. A signed, witnessed official police document. She had just, in writing, on the record, attempted to enforce her HOA's bylaws on a property that she did not own. This wasn't a fine. This was an invoice for her own destruction. This was Exhibit A. She had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea who I was. She thought she was fining a squatter over a campfire. She had no idea she had just declared a map-based war on a Master GIS Analyst. She had no idea she had just handed me the first critical piece of evidence I needed to build a federal racketeering case that would not just take her lake, but would take her house, her reputation, and her freedom. The fire burned cleanly, a single defiant torch in the night. The war was on. I let the fire burn down, the Swedish log performing its function perfectly, collapsing into a neat pile of clean, white ash. The citation felt absurd in my hand, a $500 invoice for a disturbance Carolyn had created. I went inside the small, solid cabin my grandfather had built. The entire property was a legacy, a living museum of his life. He was a retired Army Corps of Engineers surveyor, a man who believed in two things: the absolute integrity of a survey line and the right to be left alone. He had bought this 20-acre parcel in the 1960s, long before Lakeview Estates was even a gleam in some developer's eye. The lake wasn't a natural feature. He'd built it. He'd dammed the creek, excavated the basin, and created this perfect 5-acre body of water as his own private sanctuary. He left it all to me, his only grandchild, with a simple handwritten note in his will. "The maps don't lie, Mark, and neither should you. Defend the line." I had come here to do just that. not to fight, but to rest. My entire 20-year career had been a series of high-stress, high-stakes battles over exactly this kind of thing. I'm a Geographic Information Systems Analyst. It's a title that makes most people's eyes glaze over, but it's a polite, corporate term for a very specific kind of expert. I'm a professional map maker, a digital cartographer. But I don't draw maps of pirate treasure. I'm the man the state, and before that, the Army Corps of Engineers, called when a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project, a highway, a dam, a power grid, was about to be derailed by a multi-million-dollar right-of-way dispute. My job was to go into the archives, find the 100-year-old deeds, digitize the forgotten surveys, and layer them over modern high-resolution satellite imagery and tax parcels. I am, in short, a professional truth finder. I am the man who goes into a courtroom, points to a single razor-thin line on a digital projection, and says, That is the legal boundary, down to the millimeter. My testimony has settled cases worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My maps are not pictures, they are legal, binding, mathematical facts. This citation, this $500 piece of paper, was not just an annoyance. It was a factual error. It was a lie. It was a gross, arrogant, and violent insult to the entire principle of my life's work. It was a smudge on a clean map, and I was going to erase it. I wasn't just here to retire. I was here to find the peace my grandfather had built, and this woman, Carolyn, had just declared war on the one thing I am an absolute surgical-grade master of. The next morning, I needed to confirm the human terrain. Data is one thing. Motive is another. I walked down the gravel road, past my own property line, to the only other house on the lake that wasn't part of the HOA. This was Mr. Henderson's place. He was in his late 70s, a retired mechanic with hands like worn leather, sitting on his porch, cleaning a carburetor. He'd known my grandfather. He saw me coming, holding the yellow citation, and he just sighed. He put the carburetor down. So, he said, his voice a low rumble. You've met the Queen. Carolyn, I said. That's her, Henderson grunted. HOA President, Realtor of the Year 5 times running. Thinks she owns the wind that blows across this lake. He gestured with his chin. Be careful, son. You're not the first. She's been trying to get her hooks into this lake for a decade. She's convinced it's the key to her new prestige development. Thinks our properties are an eyesore holding back her property values. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This wasn't a random act of a busybody. This was tactical. What prestige development? Henderson limped inside and came back with a glossy, full-color community newsletter. The cover was a photo of Carolyn, her arms spread wide, standing in front of the lake, my lake, with a golf course superimposed in the background. The headline was, The Future of Lakeview, announcing the Prestige Marina and Golf Villas. He opened it. Inside was a full, detailed, multi-phase plan. Phase 1. Annexation and integration of Lakeview common properties. Phase 2. Construction of private HOA marina and clubhouse. She's already told the entire HOA board that she has the county's full approval to annex this lake, Henderson said, his voice bitter. She's not just a bully, Mark. She's a developer in a Karen suit, and she's got her sights set right on your grandfather's land. My eyes scanned the newsletter, my professional instincts taking over. This wasn't a dream. This was a plan. This was a high-stakes real estate venture dressed up as a community improvement. And then I saw the name of the man who had endorsed it, the man she'd quoted, promising to fast-track the permits, County Commissioner Davis. This was the moment I knew. This wasn't just an HOA. This was a political machine. I looked back at Henderson. Has she ever fined you? His face darkened. The friendly old mechanic disappeared. replaced by a man who had been pushed too far. "Find me?" he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She put a lien on my house. $5,000 for my unapproved dock, the one I built with your grandfather in 1975. $10,000 in Lakeview premium fees she just invented and claimed I owed." "But you're not in the HOA," I said, stating the fact. "Tell her that," he spat. "My lawyer, my own lawyer, told me it would cost more to fight her in court than to just pay the damn thing. She's got the county in her pocket. I had to take out a reverse mortgage on this place, the place I was born in, just to pay her extortion money and clear the title. She's a thief, Mark, a high-class, politically connected legal thief." I stood there, the citation in my hand, the glossy newsletter in the other, the $500 fine, the $15,000 lien, the same fraudulent claim. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a playbook. This was a systematic, calculated, and repeated pattern of criminal extortion. She was fining people who weren't even in her HOA. She was extorting them, laundering the money through her HOA's books as fees, and using that leverage to either seize their land or bleed them dry. And she was using the U.S. mail to send the invoices. She was using online payment portals, which meant interstate commerce, to collect her fraudulent debts. My blood wasn't boiling. It was turning to ice. The citation in my hand wasn't a fine. It was a confession. She had just stupidly, arrogantly handed me a piece of paper that proved she was committing federal crimes. She thought she was building a Marina. I was about to build her indictment. This was no longer a dispute. This was a hunt. I walked away from Mr. Henderson's porch with a cold, clear, and lethal sense of purpose. The $500 citation in my pocket was no longer an insult. It was a key. It was the first link in a chain of evidence. Henderson's story, his $15,000 extortion, was the second. Carolyn wasn't just an arrogant HOA president with a development dream. She was the acting head of a criminal enterprise. My GIS Analyst brain, the one trained by the Army Corps of Engineers to see systems and patterns, took over. I wasn't a homeowner anymore. I was an investigator. I went back to my grandfather's cabin, bypassed the workshop, and went straight to my home office, a high-tech command center I'd built for my post-retirement consulting work, equipped with 3 4K monitors, a dedicated fiber line, and a high-speed plotter. This was where I hunted. It was time to build a case file. I didn't start with the maps. I started with the money. In my experience, the maps only tell you where the crime is. The money tells you why. I used my professional credentials and my secure, encrypted connection to log into the state and county's public-facing databases. I wasn't just Googling. I was accessing the raw, searchable databases of the Secretary of State, the county tax assessor, and the State Campaign Finance Commission. I started with the name Henderson had given me. Carolyn, the Realtor of the Year. A quick search confirmed it. She was the sole proprietor and principal agent of Prestige Lake Properties, a high-end boutique real estate firm. This was her public face. Then I looked at the HOA. Sunset View HOA. I pulled its corporate filings. It was a registered non-profit, as most HOAs are. The board of directors was a list of 4 names. President, Carolyn. Vice President, a name I didn't recognize. Secretary, another name. And then, Treasurer, a man named Davis, not Commissioner Davis. I did a quick cross-reference. Franklin Davis, Commissioner Davis's brother. The political connection wasn't just a friendly one, it was familial. The man who controlled the county permits and the man who controlled the HOA's checkbook were siblings. This was no longer a kickback scheme. It was a family dynasty. Now for the grift. This was the part that made my blood run cold. Carolyn wasn't just a bully. She was a developer. Mr. Henderson said she was buying up properties. I pivoted to the county assessor's database, and ran a parcel search. I searched for every property that had been sold within the last 5 years in a 1-mile radius of the lake. A pattern emerged, stark and undeniable. 12 properties, all on the other side of the lake, all owned by elderly residents, all sold for pennies on the dollar, 30, 40, even 50% below market value. And the buyer, listed on every single new deed, was not Carolyn. The buyer was a single, anonymous LLC, Lakeview Prestige Holdings, LLC. This was sloppy. She had used prestige in the name. I pulled the corporate filings for this LLC. It was registered just 18 months prior. The registered agent? A high-priced law firm in the state capital. The principal address? A simple UPS store mailbox. This was a classic shell corporation, designed to obscure ownership and act as a firewall. But they had made a mistake. On the initial filing document, the organizer of the LLC, the person who legally created it, was listed. Not Carolyn. Not Franklin Davis. It was her brother-in-law, the owner of Prestige Homes, the construction company that, according to the newsletter, was slated to build the Marina. The loop was now complete, and it was filthy. It was a masterpiece of suburban corruption. Step 1. Carolyn, as HOA President, targets the non-HOA properties on the lake, like mine and Henderson's, with a campaign of fraudulent fines, liens, and harassment to soften them up and establish a false legal precedent. Step 2. Simultaneously, her LLC, Lakeview Prestige Holdings, run by her brother-in-law, uses her inside information and targeted harassment to buy up the other properties from elderly residents, scaring them into selling low. Step 3. Once she controls the entire perimeter, she and her political puppet, Commissioner Davis, will ram through the annexation, officially seizing the lake itself for the HOA. Step 4. The moment the county rezones the lake as HOA common property, the 12 properties her LLC bought for pennies instantly quadruple in value. Step 5. She then uses her other company, Prestige Homes, to build the Marina and forces all the HOA members, the ones who already live there, to pay for it with a massive, multi-million-dollar special assessment that will be funneled directly into her own brother-in-law's pocket, with a massive kickback, no doubt, to her. It was brilliant, it was evil, and it was a machine. She wasn't just building a marina, she was building a personal empire funded by extortion, elder abuse, and political corruption. And the $15,000 lien she'd hit Mr. Henderson with? That wasn't just a fine. That was seed money. That was the laundered, extorted cash she was using to fund her lawyers and filing fees. I had the motive. I had the how. Now I needed to go back to the what. I needed to find the original, foundational lie that her entire plan rested on. Her claim, the one she'd screamed at me and the officer, that the lake was community property. This was my specialty. This was my battlefield. I shut down the financial databases and opened my real tools. I went to the state land registry. I was going back in time. I was going to find the original maps, the ones drawn before Carolyn was even born. I was going to find the original sin. I was no longer a homeowner fighting a fine. I was a GIS analyst, and I was about to deconstruct her entire fraudulent world, one survey line at a time. The citation was the pretext. The real crime was the map. And I was the one man on earth she never should have challenged to a map fight. I shut down the financial databases. The motive was clear. The conspiracy was mapped. Now I needed the weapon. I needed the single, irrefutable, foundational truth that would detonate Carolyn's entire scheme. My hunt led me away from the county's modern digital portals, which can be manipulated, or at least obscured, and into the deep archives of the State Land Registry. This is where the real maps live. I was looking for the originals, The analog source code for the entire county, the documents drawn and filed long before Lakeview Estates, was a predatory dream. I paid the $100 fee for priority remote access and began my excavation. I wasn't just looking for my grandfather's deed, I was looking for the HOA's founding charter. I was looking for the 1968 Master Plat for Sunset View HOA. I found it. It was a beautiful, scanned, hand-drawn document filed in 1968 by the original developer, and I found my grandfather's parcel deed filed in 1961. This was the moment. I downloaded both, not as simple images, but as high-resolution, uncompressed TIFF files. I fired up my home office, the 3 monitors glowing in the dark cabin. I opened ArcGIS Pro, the professional-grade mapping software I'd used for the Army Corps of Engineers. This software doesn't just draw, it calculates. It's a multi-million-dollar legal and engineering tool, and I was about to aim it at a suburban HOA president. This was my ritual. This was my art. I imported the scanned 1968 HOA Plat Map. I set the control points, geo-referencing the old hand-drawn lines to modern, known GPS coordinates. I then imported my grandfather's 1961 deed. I digitally traced the metes and bounds, the archaic legal description that defined his property. Beginning at a found iron pin at the northeast corner, thence south 88 degrees 12 minutes west, 1,200 feet to a point. With every click, a precise, legally defined line locked into place on my screen. I then overlaid these 2 historical documents onto a third layer, the county's current, high-resolution 2025 satellite imagery and tax parcel database. The screen flickered as the layers rendered. And then, there it was, the aha moment, the kill shot. A bright, razor-sharp, mathematically perfect red line appeared on my screen. It was the legal boundary of the Sunset View HOA, as defined by their own founding document. And it stopped. It stopped dead, exactly as I'd told the officer, 100 feet away from the high water mark of my grandfather's lake. The map was a revelation. My property, my grandfather's cabin, the 5-acre lake, and Mr. Henderson's entire parcel. We were an island. We were a perfectly clear, legally defined cutout of unincorporated county land, surrounded by, but not part of, Carolyn's HOA. Her entire claim, her community property shriek, her common ground, argument, was not a mistake. It was a lie, a provable, spectacular, fraudulent lie. This was the smoking gun. This was the core of the bomb. But it wasn't enough. A good EOD tech doesn't just find the bomb, they find the detonator. I needed to prove fraud. I needed to prove intent. I went back to the HOA's public-facing tax filings, the ones filed by Franklin Davis. I downloaded the last 5 years of their budgets. And there it was, in plain black and white, a line item under income, $100,000, Lakeview premium fees, and under expenses, $50,000, lake path maintenance. My blood ran cold. This was the beast. This was the confession. She was actively taxing her residents a premium for a view of a lake she didn't own. She was budgeting $50,000 a year to maintain a path that wasn't hers. This wasn't just a plan. This was an active, ongoing criminal enterprise. I cross-referenced this with the $15,000 in fraudulent invoices she had sent to Mr. Henderson, a man not even in her HOA. She wasn't just lying to her residents, she was actively extorting her neighbors. And then, the final fatal piece, the federal detonator. How was she collecting these fees? I looked at the bottom of Henderson's invoice. Mail payments to P.O. Box 112, Lakeview, or pay online at www.sunsetviewho.com ARCH portal. She was using the United States Mail to send fraudulent invoices. She was using an online payment portal, which meant a bank processor, which meant interstate commerce, to collect the proceeds of her extortion. This was no longer a civil dispute. This was no longer a $500 citation. This was a textbook, multi-year felony grade violation of 18 U.S. Code, Paragraph 1341, mail fraud, and 18 U.S. Code, Paragraph 1343, wire fraud. She was using federal infrastructure to commit racketeering. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the 3 monitors illuminating the cabin. The case was built. The map was the proof of the lie. The HOA budgets were the proof of the conspiracy. The invoices were the proof of the crime. And the U.S. mail was the proof of federal jurisdiction. Carolyn thought she was a real estate developer, protected by a puppet commissioner. She had no idea she was a common racketeer. She had no idea that her petty $500 citation had just armed a GIS analyst with enough evidence to bypass her local political protection and send her and her entire corrupt family enterprise to federal prison. The package was ready. It was time to make some copies. This was the part of my job I always loved. The hunt was over. The evidence was compiled. Now it was time for the presentation. It was time for the controlled detonation. I am not a lawyer. I don't write cease and desist letters. I am a GIS analyst. I build data packages. And my data packages are not arguments. They are statements of irrefutable mathematical fact. I spent the next 4 hours in my home office, not in a rage, but in a state of cold, surgical focus. I didn't just print one copy. I created 10 identical, spiral-bound, professional-grade data packages. Each one was a work of art, a masterpiece of evidence. The cover was a high-resolution satellite image of the lake, with the title, Jurisdictional Analysis, Sunset View HOA versus Parcel 112A. Inside, every page was a dagger. Exhibit A. The 1968 Master Plat for the Sunset View HOA, its own founding document. Exhibit B. The modern 2025 GIS overlay, showing the irrefutable red line of the HOA's legal boundary, stopping 100 feet short of the lake. Exhibit C. A copy of the HOA's own CCNRs, with the section defining their legal boundaries highlighted. Exhibit D. A copy of the HOA's tax-filed budget, with the fraudulent $100,000 Lakeview premium and $50,000 lake path maintenance line items circled in red. Exhibit E. A copy of the $15,000 in fraudulent invoices sent to Mr. Henderson. Exhibit F. A copy of my $500 fraudulent citation. And then, the cover letter. It was not from a lawyer. It was from me. From Mark Gisp, Certified GIS Professional, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, redditstory. The tone was not angry. It was polite. It was cold. It was lethal. It read, To the board members of the Sunset View HOA. It has come to my professional attention that the HOA has been operating for several years outside its legal jurisdiction, as defined by your 1968 Founding Plat Map, see Exhibit A. Your current Lakeview premium fees and lake path maintenance budget, see Exhibit D, are therefore fraudulent, as they pertain to property the HOA does not own, see Exhibit B. Furthermore, the pattern of invoicing and levying fines against non-member parcels, such as 112A, mine, and 109B, Mr. Henderson's, constitutes a multi-year pattern of criminal racketeering, mail fraud, 18 U.S. Code, paragraph 1341, and wire fraud, 18 U.S. Code, paragraph 1343. You have 48 hours to meet the following demands. 1. Cease all collection activities against all non-member parcels. 2. Issue a full refund of all fraudulent fees, including the $15,000 extorted from Mr. Henderson. 3. Issue a public written retraction to all HOA members, clarifying that the HOA does not own, govern, or have any jurisdiction over the lake. If these demands are not met in 48 hours, this complete evidence package will be hand-delivered to the State Attorney General's Office, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and the Regional Office of the FBI. I have also, as a courtesy, sent a copy of this package to Commissioner Davis, so he can be made aware of the criminal enterprise he is currently sponsoring. I boxed up the 10 copies. I didn't mail them. That was too slow. I got in my truck. It was 9 a.m. I hand-delivered a package to every single member of the HOA board at their home addresses, which I had easily found in the tax records. I handed it to them personally. The look on their faces, the confusion, the panic, the dawning horror as they saw the professional binding and the words criminal racketeering on the cover letter, was extraordinary. The last package, the 10th one, I drove to the county building. I didn't mail it to Commissioner Davis. I walked it into his office and handed it to his chief of staff, a young, ambitious man who looked at the cover letter, went pale, and immediately closed his office door. The 48-hour clock was ticking. Carolyn didn't just panic. She detonated. She was a cornered animal. Her entire multi-million-dollar prestige development, her political kickback scheme, her entire life's work was about to be incinerated by a single retired mapmaker. She had 48 hours to either confess and refund the money, which would ruin her, or silence me. She chose to double down. She chose violence. That night, my cameras lit up. My government-grade security system, the one I'd installed for peace of mind, was now my star witness. At 2:17 a.m., a dark pickup truck with no plates pulled onto the gravel path. 2 men got out. They weren't teenagers. They were professionals. I watched in high-resolution infrared night vision as they walked onto my property. One man stood watch. The other, a large man in a Prestige Homes t-shirt, pulled a cordless chainsaw from the truck bed. My blood turned to ice. He walked onto my grandfather's wooden dock, the one he built with his own hands, and attacked it. The high-pitched scream of the chainsaw ripped the night apart as he sliced through the support beams. In less than 2 minutes, my grandfather's dock, a 60-year-old piece of family history, was a splintered wreck, collapsing into the dark water. But they weren't done. They walked to my fire pit. The second man pulled a bag of quick-set concrete from the truck. They mixed it with lake water and poured it into my grandfather's stone fire pit, filling it to the brim. A 1,000-tolerant act of pure, spiteful vandalism. They tore down my no trespassing signs and threw them into the lake. Then they got in their truck and left. I sat in my office, watching the saved footage. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure and cold it was almost silent. This was no longer about maps. This was no longer about fraud. This was a desecration. This was a declaration of total war. She had just crossed a line from which there was no retreat. And I had every single second of it on video, crystal clear, including the Prestige Homes logo on the vandal's shirt, her brother-in-law's company. She had just, on camera, directly linked her criminal enterprise to felony-level property destruction. The next day was the county commissioners' meeting, the one where Carolyn and Commissioner Davis were scheduled to present their Lakeview annexation plan. The meeting was a formality, a rubber stamp. The room was half empty, a few bored local reporters, a handful of HOA residents Carolyn had bussed in to applaud. Carolyn and Davis were at the front podium, all smiles, their glossy Prestige Marina presentation on the big screen. They looked confident, powerful, and untouchable. Then, the public comment period began. "Next," the clerk mumbled, "a Mr. Mark." I walked to the front. I was calm. I was wearing a simple pressed shirt. I carried a single spiral-bound data package and a USB drive. "Good morning," I said, my voice carrying in the quiet room. "My name is Mark. I'm a 20-year veteran of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and a certified GIS professional. I am also the owner of Parcel 112A, the land you are currently referring to as the Lakeview Annexation." The room, which had been half asleep, suddenly snapped to attention. The local news camera, which had been pointed at the ceiling, swiveled and zoomed in on my face. Commissioner Davis's smile froze. Carolyn's eyes went wide. "I am here," I continued, "to correct a profound factual error in your proposal." I placed my data package in front of the board. "Your entire plan is based on the false premise that the Sunset View HOA has jurisdiction over, or ownership of, the lake. This is factually incorrect. According to the county's own 1968 Master Plat, which I have included as Exhibit A, the HOA's legal boundary ends 100 feet before the lake begins. The land you are attempting to annex is, and always has been, private property." A gasp went through the room. Carolyn shot to her feet. That's a lie! This is a frivolous objection. This man is a squatter. He's—" "I'm not finished," I said, my voice cutting through hers. "The real issue is that your primary petitioner, Ms. Carolyn, has not just been mistaken. She has been using this false premise to commit what the U.S. Postal Inspection Service defines as felony mail and wire fraud, systematically extorting non-members of her HOA for Lakeview fees she is not entitled to. I have included copies of the fraudulent invoices and the HOA's own budgets as Exhibits D and E." The room exploded. The board members were staring at Carolyn. Commissioner Davis looked like he had been shot. This is slander," Carolyn shrieked. This is an outrage." "Speaking of outrages," I said, my voice turning to ice. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket. "This is what happened to my private property at 2:17 this morning, less than 12 hours after I presented this exact evidence package to the HOA board." I plugged the drive into the podium's laptop. I hit play. The entire, silent, horrified room watched the high-resolution, night vision footage of the two men. They watched the chainsaw. They watched the Prestige Homes logo flash on the man's shirt as he hacked my grandfather's dock to pieces. They watched them pour the concrete. The sound of the chainsaw echoed in the quiet, stunned chamber. I hit pause. I turned to the board. "This is not a community improvement project," I said, my voice low and shaking with controlled fury. "This is a criminal conspiracy. You are not voting on an annexation. You are voting on whether to be accessories to felony-level extortion, fraud, and property destruction. I urge you to table this motion, and I urge the county sheriff and the district attorney to open an immediate criminal investigation." It was a kill shot. The local news camera was broadcasting this live. Commissioner Davis's face was chalk white. He was pounding his gavel. "Order! Order! This meeting is postponed!" Carolyn was being surrounded by reporters, screaming, "Lies! Slander! It's all lies!" But it was too late. I hadn't just brought a map. I had brought a case. Her own neighbors, the ones she'd been robbing for years, were staring at her, their faces masks of dawning, furious comprehension. Her entire empire of lies, her prestige development, her political machine. It was all crumbling. Live on public access television, all because of a $500 fine for a campfire she had no right to complain about. The war was over. The retaliation was about to begin. The chaos that erupted in that commissioners' meeting was just the preliminary detonation. It was the shock and awe phase, designed to scatter her forces and expose her political cover. But as any good GIS analyst or military engineer knows, a map is useless without a coordinated, overwhelming plan of attack. My public presentation was the air support, the targeted strike that blinded the enemy. Now it was time for the ground invasion. The real retaliation, the sharper, more permanent, and more devastating destruction of her criminal enterprise, began the very next morning at 9 a.m. sharp. I didn't just call a local lawyer who would send a polite letter. I had spent the entire night on a secure video conference with a high-powered, high-stakes litigation firm from the state capital. This was a firm that didn't just advertise on billboards. They were the apex predators of the legal world, the ones who specialized in complex, multi-million-dollar corporate fraud and racketeering cases. They had seen my 4K video. They had reviewed my GIS data package. They were, to put it mildly, salivating. They didn't just take the case. They fought over it, agreeing to represent our new class of plaintiffs on a massive contingency. By 10 a.m., we filed. This wasn't a simple civil suit for the $1,000 in quickset concrete and the destruction of my dock. This was the beast mode attack I had been planning. We filed a 200-page, meticulously documented federal RICO lawsuit, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, the statute designed to dismantle the mob. I was a plaintiff, of course, but the lead plaintiff, the public face of the case, was Mr. Henderson. This was the better strategy. He was the 70-year-old retired mechanic, the grandfather, the man she had systematically extorted and callously forced into a reverse mortgage. He was the perfect, sympathetic victim to her calculated corporate greed. The media would love him. And our lawsuit didn't just name the Sunset View HOA as a defendant. That was for amateurs. We named Carolyn personally. We named her shell company, Lakeview Prestige Holdings, LLC. We named her brother-in-law's construction company, Prestige Homes. And, in the best and most surgically precise legal maneuver, we named County Commissioner Davis, in both his official and his personal capacity, as a key co-conspirator and political beneficiary of a criminal enterprise. The claim itself was a work of art, a beast of a legal filing. It was not an argument, it was a mathematical proof. We alleged a multi-year, systematic enterprise designed to defraud homeowners with fraudulent fees, extort non-member residents with fabricated liens, depress property values through a targeted harassment campaign, the elderly buyout scheme, and then use that extorted, laundered money and political influence to fraudulently annex and develop land they never owned. The map was our unshakable proof of the lie. The invoices were the confessions of the crime. The high-definition video of the chainsaw was the proof of the conspiracy. We didn't just ask for the $15,000 back for Mr. Henderson. We didn't just ask for the $500 back for me. We asked for treble damages, 3 times the amount, on all fraudulent Lakeview fees collected from every resident for the last 10 years. We were asking for millions. The RICO suit, by its very nature, screamed for federal attention. It was a formal public allegation of federal crimes. But I am not a man who waits for the system to work. I'm a man who makes it work. While the lawyers were filing the civil suit at the federal courthouse, I was executing my own parallel, sharper plan. I took my data package, now updated with the high-resolution, time-stamped video of the dock's destruction, and I didn't just mail it. I drove 2 hours to the regional field office of the FBI. I didn't ask to speak to a desk sergeant. I asked for the Public Corruption Task Force. I sat in a small, gray, windowless room, and for 1 hour, I walked 2 very serious, very quiet agents through the entire GIS map, the money trail from the HOA to the shell company, and the political kickback scheme with Commissioner Davis. When I got to the part about his brother being the HOA treasurer, they stopped taking notes and just listened. When I played the video of the Prestige Homes logo, crystal clear in the infrared light, they looked at each other. One of them just nodded. "We'll take it from here, Mr. Hayes. Thank you for this. This is exceptionally clean." But that wasn't even the best part. The FBI was the hammer, the big, obvious weapon. I needed the scalpel. My sharpest weapon. The one she never, ever would have seen coming. I drove from the FBI office directly to the regional headquarters of the United States Postal Inspection Service. This is the agency most people forget about. They are the oldest, most tenacious, and most vicious federal law enforcement agency in the country. They have a conviction rate of over 98%, and they loathe, with a biblical, unforgiving passion, anyone who uses the U.S. mail to commit fraud. I didn't meet with a junior agent. My military credentials and the words interstate wire and mail fraud got me a meeting with the inspector in charge. I laid out the fraudulent invoices. I showed him the $15,000 lien on Henderson's house. I showed him the pattern of extortion, all sent via U.S. mail. I showed him the online portal proving the wire fraud. His eyes lit up. He saw the RICO filing. He saw the FBI was already involved. This wasn't a small-time HOA dispute. This was a multi-agency, interstate, racketeering and conspiracy case. He assigned it a case number on the spot. He was thrilled. He looked at me, shook my hand, and said, "Son, you just made our year." The retaliation was now a three-pronged beast of an attack. A civil RICO suit seeking millions in damages, an FBI investigation into political corruption and extortion, and a USPIS criminal investigation into mail and wire fraud. Carolyn's world collapsed. It didn't take 48 hours. It took one. The HOA's insurance carrier, upon receiving a legal notice that their client, the board of directors, was being sued under the RICO Act and was the named subject of two separate active federal criminal investigations, did exactly what I knew they would. They triggered the Criminal Act's exclusion in their policy. They immediately, via fax and email, sent a notice of non-coverage and dropped the HOA's directors and officers liability insurance instantly. This was the true kill shot. This was the sharper blade. Carolyn, and every member of her board, was now personally and individually exposed for the millions in damages we were seeking. The bank, upon learning their client's insurance was voided and that the HOA was under federal investigation for racketeering and money laundering, froze the HOA's accounts, pending a federal subpoena. The $500,000 she'd allocated for her brother-in-law's Marina? Gone. The slush fund she used to pay her army of lawyers? Frozen. Her brother-in-law, the man who owned Prestige Homes, was picked up by the FBI 2 days later, faced with the high-definition video of his employee on his time card destroying my doc and the promise of his entire company being seized as a criminal asset. He did what all cowards do. He flipped. He turned state's evidence. He became a cooperating witness against Carolyn and Commissioner Davis in exchange for immunity for his company. Her entire rotten castle, built on a foundation of lies, was imploding. Her political shield was under federal investigation. Her financial accounts were frozen. Her own family, her co-conspirators, had turned on her to save themselves. She had called the cops on me for a campfire. I had retaliated by using her own fraudulent invoices and my expert maps to send in the feds, dismantle her business, and leave her personally and financially ruined, all before we ever had to step foot in a courtroom. The best part? We were just getting started. The final, public humiliation was still to come. The final collapse was a spectacle of pure, karmic justice. It was a beast of a takedown, and it played out not in a quiet, closed courtroom, but in the full, harsh, unforgiving glare of the public eye. Carolyn's public humiliation was total. The 6 o'clock news, the same local station that had broadcast her disastrous commissioners' meeting, led their broadcast for a week with footage that money cannot buy. It wasn't just a reporter standing on a sidewalk. It was high-definition aerial footage, shot from their news helicopter, of 2 simultaneous federal raids. The first was at Commissioner Davis's office, with FBI agents in their blue windbreakers carrying out servers and boxes labeled evidence. The second, and better, raid was at Carolyn's sprawling million-dollar Prestige Lake home, the one she'd paid for with a decade of extortion. The cameras zoomed in on her, in her silk bathrobe, her face a mask of pure, unfiltered, makeup-free rage, as agents from the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, the ones I had sicked on her, carried out her computers, her file cabinets, and her boxes of fraudulent invoices. She was arrested, not by a local cop, but by a federal inspector, led out in handcuffs, and put in the back of a dark government sedan. She had called the cops on me for a campfire. I had used the law, the mail, and her own boundless greed to send the feds to her front door. Her trial, and Commissioner Davis's, was a foregone conclusion. Davis, the political puppet, crumbled first. Faced with the FBI's evidence of the kickback scheme and his own brother's testimony against him, he was forced to resign in disgrace. He pled guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, losing his job, his pension, and his freedom in a single, humiliating hearing. Carolyn, arrogant, delusional, and entitled to the very end, refused a plea deal. She actually went to trial. It was a disaster for her. The prosecution simply played my high-resolution GIS map on a giant screen for the jury. They showed the 1968 red line. Then, they showed the $100,000 Lakeview premium line item from her own budget. The case was over in that instant. The jury, after listening to Mr. Henderson's heartbreaking testimony about his reverse mortgage, convicted her in under an hour. The beast verdict was the stuff of legends. The federal judge, a woman with zero tolerance for white-collar predators, sentenced Carolyn to 5 years in federal prison for mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. But the sharper victory, the one that truly mattered, came from the civil RICO case. With the criminal conviction now a matter of public record, our class action lawsuit was granted summary judgment. The criminal enterprise was no longer an allegation. It was a matter of established federal fact. And under the rules of RICO, that meant one thing: treble damages. The court-appointed receiver, using the forensic accounting from the IRS, calculated the total amount Carolyn's machine had stolen from the community through inflated dues, fraudulent fines, and embezzlement at $4.1 million. The judge took that number, multiplied it by 3, and awarded our class action lawsuit $12.3 million. And then came the best part: the land. The judge, in a ruling that made legal history in the state, declared the 1985 quiet title action, the one that had stolen my family's land, to be a product of demonstrable dynastic fraud. She voided it. With a single stamp of her gavel, the 1985 title was erased. The entire 120-acre parcel and every improvement upon it, the gated entrance, the roads, the tennis courts, the 12 homes, and the glass and steel community center, legally reverted to the last legitimate deed on file. The 1924 surveyor's deed, held by the estate of Robert Hayes, and now by me. The victory was not just total. It was biblical. I owned everything. The entire corrupt, rotten kingdom was now legally my property. Commissioner Davis, the shield, had been the first to fall. Facing the irrefutable evidence from the FBI raid and the certainty of a federal indictment, he had taken a plea deal. He resigned in utter disgrace, pled guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and was sentenced to 3 years in a minimum security federal prison. He was a broken, ruined man before Carolyn even saw a jury. His political machine was dismantled, his name a local synonym for crook. The shield was broken, the armor shattered. The community was in chaos. The homeowners, the ones who had lived in those 12 houses on my land, were now, technically, trespassers. They were panicked. They were the ones who had silently stood by while Carolyn terrorized Maria. They had enjoyed the high property values her tyranny had created. And now they faced total ruin. They and the receiver for the now dissolved HOA came to me, hats in hand, terrified. They were expecting me to be another Carolyn. They were expecting me to evict them, to sell their homes out from under them, to become the new tyrant. They had no idea who my grandfather was. They had no idea what his code meant. We met at the community center. My community center. I stood at the podium where Carolyn had shrieked her lies. The room was packed with the terrified homeowners and the families from my RICO suit. I looked at Maria. She was in the front row, a look of profound, quiet strength on her face. Her GoFundMe, which had grown to over $250,000, had already paid off her mortgage. She was safe. This was about their future. I laid out the terms. They were not negotiations. They were the new law. First, I said, the old HOA is dead, it is dissolved, its charter is revoked, and its bank accounts, once unfrozen, will be the first round payment on the $12.3 million judgment. Second, to Maria Sanchez, and to every other family in this room who was a victim of Carolyn's fines, you will be paid first. The full amount of your judgment plus interest. Maria, your $20,000 fine just became a $60,000 punitive payout. Your foreclosure is reversed. Your title is clear. You will never have to worry again. I looked at her, and she was crying, but this time she was smiling. Third, I said, turning to the 12 homeowners on my land. You are legally squatters. I have the right to evict every one of you. I have the right to seize your homes. But I am not Carolyn. I let that hang in the air. I am giving you a choice. You can live here, but you will live here under a new covenant. I am redrawing the parcel map. I am granting each of you a new, clean, legal title to the lot your house sits on. The price of this new title, I paused, is $1, and your signature on a new community charter, a charter that limits its own power, that protects homeowners, and that has one single ironclad rule. No one ever touches another veteran's home. No one ever touches a widow's home. You will protect each other. You will not prey on each other. You will sign it, or you will pack. They wept. They were weeping with relief. They stood and they applauded. They weren't just my tenants. They were my new community, forged in the fire of Carolyn's destruction. And the community center, her monument of glass and steel, her palace built on my land with stolen federal money. The receiver looked at me. Mr. Hayes, the building, it's yours. What do you want to do with it? This was the best part. This was the total, unshakable victory. I looked at this building I had hated, and I knew exactly what it was for. Carolyn built this as a monument to her own ego, I said. From today, it is a monument to integrity. It is being renamed. This is now the Sergeant Robert Hayes and Corporal Carlos Sanchez Veterans Legacy Center. It will be a non-profit. Its mission will be to house a workshop for vets, to provide free legal aid for any homeowner in the state facing a predatory HOA, and, I looked at Maria, it will be run by a new board of directors. Its first president will be Maria Sanchez. The room didn't just applaud. It erupted. This wasn't just victory. This was justice. This was a better community, risen from the ashes of a corrupt one. My own victory was quiet. My grandfather's house was mine, free and clear forever. The land, the true land, the shoreline, the ancient trees. It was all secure. The $12.3 million judgment would more than cover my legal fees, my expenses, and the full museum-quality restoration of my grandfather's workshop. I used part of the money to buy the lot on either side of my property, creating a permanent 20-acre buffer zone that no HOA, no developer, no one could ever touch again. My sanctuary was complete. The final scene was 6 months later. I was in the workshop. It was restored to perfection, every tool, every planer, every lathe, either original and repaired, or replaced with a perfect, period-specific antique. It smelled of linseed oil and cedar and the cold, clean scent of the lake. I was soldering. The 1940s radio. I was tracing the final wire, the one Carolyn's nephew had made me snap. I laid a perfect, gleaming bead of silver solder. I plugged it in. I turned the ancient Bakelite knob, a crackle, a hiss, and then, clear as a bell, a local station playing simple, quiet, classical music. I stood there, listening, my hands steady. The land was safe. The legacy was secure. The bullies were gone. The war was over. And the silence was finally, truly, peace.